For most mutants, when their powers activate for the first time, it's usually during some horrific incident or traumatic occurrence. More often than not, their abilities first appear while they're under extreme stress, or maybe in fear or pain, and in some cases, it's during a personal crisis, like the death of a loved one. But see, that's only the first level of mutation, and there exist innumerable mutants who also go through what Marvel calls a secondary mutation, and while a secondary mutation sounds like it would augment the power set of a Homo superior, that's not always the case. Sometimes it gives them new abilities or boosts their existing skill set, but there have also been times when a mutant's secondary mutation was actually a lot closer to a curse. Beast explained in New Mutants Volume 2, Number 12, that secondary mutations can appear after a mutant's original powers and may emerge under intense stress. Experiments, severe injury, drugs, and, of course, magic can also radically change mutants, although those externally induced changes aren't always true secondary mutations. That's why we put this list together, to confirm secondary mutations and closely related mutant transformations that helped some mutants achieve immeasurable power. It's a really fun list, and we had a lot of fun making it, so let's get right into it without wasting another second. Iceman. Bobby Drake. Iceman's secondary mutation, much like many secondary mutations, was a bit of a disaster for him. In many ways, it wasn't even an upgrade, and it was definitely far from heroic. Bobby Drake knew what was changing inside of him, but there was a great deal of stress and denial attached to it, and more importantly, it initially felt like an injury at best. But the thing is, Bobby kept on ignoring the serious changes that were going on inside of him, and that too for a very long time, which is a common selfless trait found in most of the X-Men. It all started in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, Number 412, when the team found itself in Cassidy Keep, owned by Black Tom Cassidy, the Irish supervillain mutant whose biology became plant-like after an artificial wood-like substance was grafted onto his wounds, which granted him the power to control vegetation, absorb life energy, and form plant clones. Black Tom managed to take Iceman down and had also managed to drain the energy of most of the X-Men. Furthermore, they had all been trapped in Black Tom Cassidy's vines, and in the end, it was only Nightcrawler who remained free. Nightcrawler, being a man of God, initially tried to calm the situation amicably, so he tried to reason with Black Tom while also freeing Stacy X. And during this time, Black Tom lost control over Iceman, which gave the others a chance to do their things. Iceman basically started freezing the vines, and it worked for a while, at least until it didn't. Iceman could feel that Black Tom Cassidy was fighting back, and although this allowed the X-Men to free themselves, a massive vine grievously injured Iceman, which is what triggered his secondary mutation. Later, in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, Number 415, Iceman argued with Archangel because Bobby didn't want to visit the school nurse. He just wouldn't listen, but Archangel understood that there was something wrong with Iceman, something he wasn't willing to reveal to others, and it was only after much back and forth that Bobby agreed to visit the nurse, Annie Gazikanian. He initially hesitates from taking his shirt off to show her the wound he received while battling Black Tom, but later gives in, and you could see that his body was turning itself into organic ice, while earlier, his skin would just be covered with it. What was even worse was that Iceman couldn't change his skin back to how it used to be, so his change was becoming permanent. Later, in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, issues 429 through 434, Nightcrawler gets abducted, and the X-Men have to rescue him. Iceman was a part of this mission, and during it, his entire body, which was in ice form at this point, gets shattered, leaving just his head behind, and the young mutant could only get his full body back after using the moisture from one of his fallen enemies' bodies. But after this, Bobby couldn't return to his original human form, which obviously left him pretty pissed off with everyone. Gambit. Remy LeBeau. Gambit's so-called secondary mutation is a little tricky because in the main universe, Earth 616, Remy LeBeau never actually received New Sun's abilities through a confirmed secondary mutation. And in order to really gauge the idea of his secondary mutation, we must first explore a bit of his past on Earth 616, and I'm talking about the past before he became an indispensable member of the X-Men. As some of you may know, Remy was a part of the Thieves Guild, but these guys were almost always in a rift with the Assassins Guild, so a pact between them was proposed, and like so many other attempts at peace, this one was going to happen through marriage. The two guilds arranged a marriage between him and Belladonna Boudreaux, but Belladonna's brother, Julian, was opposed to the marriage, and he challenged Remy to a duel, but sadly, Remy killed Julian, although in self-defense, and this created an even larger rift between the two guilds. So, in order to protect whatever peace remained, Remy was excommunicated and banished from New Orleans. He somehow came to believe that his betrothed, Belladonna, would never be happy in exile with him, so he even ended their relationship before moving on. In one fell swoop, the man lost his city, his love, and his very life as he knew it. After that, Remy wandered the world using his talent as a master thief. His mutant power allowed him to charge objects with explosive energy, and over time, charged playing cards became his trademark weapon. But the problem was that his powers began to slip out of control. That was when he went to the master geneticist, Mr. Sinister, for help. Sinister removed some of Remy's brain tissue, which reduced his power to a level he could handle, and New Sun, his counterpart from another universe, later showed readers what an unrestricted version of Remy's powers could become. This counterpart, New Sun, was from Earth 9921. This version of Remy came into existence under very different circumstances. His parents had been paid by the government project, Alpha 1, to have a child because of their genetic potential, mostly because their own genetics would have supported the birth of such a superpowered child. That child was then raised by Alpha 1 and worked towards training his powers even before they manifested. So, when his abilities actually did manifest, he already knew how to use them. In fact, he became so powerful that he destroyed the Alpha 1 facility and flew away after the catastrophic events surrounding his reality's Phoenix unfolded. Can you even imagine how powerful this guy was? Anyways, after that, he worked as a Lone Ranger for a while, and that was mostly because he never felt truly comfortable working alongside other heroes. Then, Jean-Luc Lebeau, Remy's adoptive father, told him about the prophecy of the Old Kingdom and his fate as Le Diable Blanc, the white devil with red eyes. Together, they prepared a ceremony in a mountain in Turkey where a statue of the last king had been buried. The ritual worked, but the mix of kinetic as well as mystical energies created a supermassive shockwave that ended up wiping out all life on the planet except for New Sun himself. He tried to use his power to undo it through some time travel, but instead of restoring his own world, he ended up accessing the Spiral of Worlds, a gateway to the multiverse. It was here that he found other versions of himself and vowed never to let another world suffer the fate of his own. Elixir, Joshua Foley. Much like Iceman, Elixir's secondary mutation was filled with a bunch of serious problems. His power set did get an upgrade, yes, but it wasn't without a great deal of trauma and grief. The story of the destructive side of Joshua's mutation reached a critical juncture after that fateful M-Day when most mutants across the world lost their powers, and Josh was one of only 27 students at the Institute who retained their abilities. Emma Frost, who was leading the Institute at the time, feared for the safety of the depowered students and staff, and so she ordered them to leave and find someplace safer. This group included Danny Moonstar, Josh's guardian, who had also lost her powers. The depowered students were moved through the Morlock tunnels to a bus, but their transit itself came under attack because Reverend William Stryker, the terrible anti-mutant zealot, had the bus bombed, in the aftermath of which around 42 former students died. This singular act of hate and violence towards his people set Josh down a much darker path. You see, his powers allowed him to give life and cure diseases. But this was something he just couldn't fix. Following this, Emma Frost decided that the kids needed to learn to defend themselves, even if they had been depowered, so she would pit them against each other in violent matches to see who could join the training for the new X-Men. During one such training confrontation, Elixir struck Colossus with a metal beam. Of course, Josh was still upset over the students who had died because of Stryker's attack, and his grief got the better of him. Emma became furious because of this behavior, and Josh was let go from the training team. Later, during a conversation with fellow student Lori Collins, she told Josh that Emma had it wrong and that the team was too much about violence, while Josh could do something beautiful like healing people. But Josh explained what had happened when he had tried to heal DJ. He had felt DJ die, felt life leave him, and said a piece of him had died too. And then, right there, during that conversation, Lori was shot and killed by Matthew Risman, one of Stryker's men. This absolutely broke Joshua, so much so that when the X-Men and students found Lori's body, with Josh beside her, Wolverine tried to pull him away, but Lori's death had triggered the destructive side of Josh's mutation, and it caused painful boils or blisters on Wolverine's hands and wrists. Later, when Stryker attacked the Institute, Josh sat unresponsive in the infirmary at first, But then, his rage took over. He used his power to kill Stryker by causing massive swelling and organ failure. This changed his golden skin to a deep metallic black, and Josh himself fell into a catatonic state. Later, after X-23 was mortally wounded in the final fight with Nimrod, Hellion brought her back to the Institute, and Julian requested Josh do something about it, and the mutant finally managed to move past his pain to heal Laura. His skin turned golden once again, although some black areas did remain. So yeah, not only could Josh heal, he could also give people severe diseases. This was the real danger of Elixir's mutation. He could cause sickness, organ failure, massive swelling, and deadly damage with just a touch. He killed William Stryker in seconds, harmed the demon Belasco, nearly erased Wither's body, and later gave Vanisher a brain tumor so that the X-Men had some control over the unpredictable teleporting mutant. After his rebirth, this harmful side became strong enough to hurt people with rapid regeneration and near invulnerability, though he stopped in time and reversed the process. As for his skin, gold meant life, while black meant death. Angel. Warren Worthington III. Although Warren Worthington III had a genuine secondary mutation, there were at least 2 more drastic externally induced transformations that this guy underwent, and each of these upgrades brought him at least some degree of emotional damage. First, there was his natural secondary mutation, where his blood gained the power to heal others. Then, there was his Archangel form, which was forced upon him by the mutant Apocalypse. And later, there was that darker avian beast form in which he turned extremely monstrous. Let's begin with the secondary mutation, which was best explained in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, Issue 427. In this issue, Warren went to a children's hospital in Los Angeles, and as he walked through the reception area, the children were amused and parents shocked. I mean, you don't usually see a winged man at a hospital every day. Warren asked to meet whoever ran the facility because he sort of wanted to make an offer they couldn't refuse. Soon after, he was seen talking to the senior doctor and staff, to whom he explained that his blood could heal and that he wanted to learn the limits of that ability. The doctor planned to test his blood for viruses like hepatitis and AIDS, but Warren cut him off and claimed that mutants could not acquire AIDS. Now, let's be clear, that's something Warren said, not a universal rule established for every Marvel mutant. Next, the doctor cut his own arm and then cut Warren's, while Warren told him to make the cut on his arm deeper and longer so it wouldn't heal too fast. The doctor was stunned because Warren's wound had indeed already begun to heal. They pressed their wounds together for a few seconds, and when they separated, the doctor's arm had healed without a scar. So yeah, Warren's blood could heal others, and that meant that his secondary mutation was way more powerful and useful than flight. But then, as some of you know, Warren Worthington III is also known as Archangel, and this is because Apocalypse transformed Warren into his horseman, Death, and gave him techno-organic wings. These wings had feathers that could be fired like flechettes, hit like bullets, and even pierce steel because of their structure and endurance. Warren could also use them to launch himself through obstacles and tear through whatever stood in his path. Later, those wings were shed away and seemed to reveal feathered wings beneath, although it was later said that they only appeared organic. Once these organic wings were lost again, the techno-organic wings returned, and so too did the blue skin. After he killed those who had taken his organic wings, he returned to his original angel form. However, the Archangel form didn't entirely cease to exist because when under stress, Warren would transform back into Archangel and couldn't even fully control it. But I think one of the worst of Warren's later transformations happened in Legion of X number 7. After Judgment Day, Nightcrawler and the Legionnaires tried to regain control of Legion's astral plane and return to missions. At the same time, Kurt found his own body was transforming and developing devil horns from his head. Soon, Nightcrawler learned that a terrible beast had attacked Angel, only to realize that that beast was Angel himself. Warren was hardly recognizable, and although he was still bluish, he developed feathers along his neck and arms, and in place of wings, he now had talons. I think it's safe to say that this was the most diabolical and unnerving form that Warren has ever taken on, which is sad because it has some serious competition. Quentin Quire. Kid Omega. Quentin Quire, also known as Kid Omega, has the word kid in his superhero name, but he also has the name Omega in his name, which means that he was far from a regular student. He was an Omega-level mutant, a top-tier telepath, a telekinetic, and a super scion, which basically meant that even adult mutants, heroes or bad guys, had very good reason to be wary of him. On top of that, Quentin had ties to the Phoenix Force. He served as its avatar once, and an older version of him from the future was said to be a future host. So yeah, the power levels with this guy were always insane, but there was a problem with Quentin himself. You see, Quentin hadn't always been a good guy. At one point, he attacked Professor X, helped spark a riot at the X Mansion, and called for open season on humans. He wanted all-out slaughter without any discrimination, which explains just how unhinged he had been at one point. Then, during one of his fights, a telepathic shockwave blasted him through a wall. Now, Quentin had already overdosed on a drug called Kick, to the point where his body couldn't handle it any longer, and because of the combined effect of this overdose of Kick and the telekinetic blast, his psionic energy went totally out of control. This triggered his secondary mutation, where his body broke down and his consciousness entered a disembodied psionic energy state with an enormous telepathic reach. In fact, Quentin was about to take out Professor X when Xavier called Zorn, who exposed Quentin to his star-like head. That seemed to end Quentin's life, but of course, he wasn't really dead. You see, his energy form had actually survived inside a containment unit in Beast's lab. When the Phoenix Force returned, it first mistook him for Jean Grey and then moved on, but its presence revived him and allowed him to reform his body. After that, Quentin tried to bring back Sophie, the girl he loved, but failed. Later, when the Phoenix revived Jean Grey and entered Emma Frost, Quentin broke the containment that held Phoenix and Emma, then begged it to bring Sophie back. But the sad part is that Sophie rejected him and chose death again, and all of Kid Omega's efforts were for nothing. Hurt and shaken, Quentin apologized to the X-Men before returning to his energy form, and after that, he ended up back in a beaker in Beast's lab. That didn't last forever, and nowadays Quentin is an active member of the X-Men, but still, it was a dark period for a mutant who's generally considered to be just a kid. Polaris. Lorna Dane. Polaris has had a pretty tough life, and her path to her secondary mutation was one that totally messed up not just her body, but her original powers as well, and also her mind. I mean, first, she had been under the control of Malice, an evil entity that had taken hold of her mind, and it was only after Mr. Sinister was seemingly killed that Malice's hold over Polaris began to weaken. Once out of that mind control, Lorna managed to call the X-Men for help, but by the time they arrived in Australia, the damage had already been done. And in fact, it had been exacerbated. When the X-Men found her, Lorna was with Zala Dane, her alleged half-sister, who also happened to be a priestess of the Savage Land's Sun People. The team arrived just in time to see Zala Dane escape, but Havoc managed to slip into her army under disguise while the X-Men were in hot pursuit. Once they caught up with Zala Dane, they learned that she had gathered an entire army of Savage Land people, and one of their mutates named Worm had kept those people under mental control for her. But this wasn't even the big reveal. Zala Dane claimed that she was Polaris' sister, although Marvel never conclusively confirmed their exact biological relationship, and using one of the High Evolutionary's machines, Zala Dane managed to steal all of Polaris' magnetic powers. And if you're wondering just why Polaris has magnetic powers, well, she's the daughter of none other than the master of magnetism, Magneto. Although Polaris' original powers were gone, the whole process did at least one useful thing. It finally severed the connection between Lorna and Malice once and for all. So yeah, Lorna did lose her magnetic powers, but she was also freed from the entity that had been making her do all sorts of horrible things. Small comfort, but yeah, Zala Dane and her forces then clashed with Kazar and the X-Men, who were trying to save Lorna. And this is where Polaris' secondary mutation suddenly kicked in. Although she couldn't figure out why, her body started to change and she grew to extreme levels. Furthermore, Lorna became extremely durable and gained superhuman strength. Now, this only means that in the absence of one ability, Lorna's body gave her another. Meanwhile, Zala Dane's army broke free from Worm's control and Lorna regained her freedom. But the story didn't end there because Lorna had nowhere else to go and headed for Muir Island. But on the way, her new mutation activated again, and once again she grew to an exponential size. The craziest part here was that apart from the increase in size, something else was happening too. You see, her secondary mutation also affected the people around her by amplifying negative emotions like anger and hate. In Uncanny X-Men issue 254, when Moira McTaggart was trying to examine Lorna, even she couldn't properly explain what had happened, although she argued that Zala Dane could only have stolen Lorna's powers if there were a genuine biological connection between them. Lorna later helped Moira and Banshee defend Muir Island from the Reavers, who had come there while searching for Wolverine, But by this point, Lorna had become something of a nexus for all kinds of negative emotional energy, and no one was able to fully understand why. It became so amplified that it made emotions like violence, hatred, and anger rise all across the planet. But after the Shadow King's defeat, her magnetic powers returned, likely because Zaladane had died shortly before, and Psylocke's neural disruptive psionic blade had helped end the strange mutation. Black Tom Cassidy. We already talked about this guy a little in the entry for Iceman, but let me tell you, this guy's plant transformation didn't just feel like a level up, it was absolutely horrific if you ask us. This guy had the mutant power to generate concussive bursts of force as long as he had a wooden medium, which is why he carried a shillelagh around, but his long-term criminal career was thanks in large part to his partnership with the Juggernaut. But as the shillelagh interacted with and altered his mutation, he started to look less and less like himself. At one point, Juggernaut was lured into a trap by the South Korean cult of Chejo-do. They stole his powers and kept them inside a crystal from the Gem of Sidorak. Black Tom then contacted Storm and Gambit so they could help recover the gem and bring Juggernaut's strength back. The plan worked, but like most X-Men missions, something was bound to go wrong. The ritual allowed a hostile entity to possess Kane Marco, and Tom was pulled with him into an interdimensional void. With help from the Octid and the X-Men, Juggernaut was cleansed, and both he and Tom made it back to Earth. But Tom's condition got worse after that. His transformation progressed again, and he turned into a mass of vegetation. His mind began to fall apart, and he attacked both Juggernaut and the X-Men at Cassidy Keep. The fight destroyed much of the castle, and because Tom couldn't control what was happening to him, he pushed Juggernaut away, and this little episode did some serious damage to their long-term relationship. After M-Day, though, Tom's extreme plant transformation was seemingly reduced, and his human appearance was back, and so were his original bioblasting powers. After the decimation, he had lost a large share of the extra plant-related abilities, while his mind became more stable. He also recognized the horror of what he had done to Sammy Perry, also known as Squid Boy, but he insisted he hadn't been in his right mind and therefore didn't take responsibility for his actions. Then, true to form, he went back to mercenary work, but the thing is, even after his body returned to normal, Tom still had some degree of connection with plants. He later displayed both old and new abilities related to plant control, while his main power remained bioorganic thermokinetic blasts, where he could fire concussive force or heat through wood, usually with his wooden shillelagh as the focus. After genetic alteration, he could also channel that force through the parts of his body that had been grafted into a wood-like substance. He could use the energy in more varied ways as well, not just as direct blasts. At one point, he shaped bioenergy into barriers with his shillelagh to deflect young Scott's optic blasts, and he could also increase his own striking force by channeling power through it. Sunspot. Roberto da Costa. Roberto da Costa, or Bobby, left the New Mutants after his father died, and then he went with Gideon, who was supposed to be an old friend, to take over his father's business. But the thing is, Gideon was never really a good guy. He was in fact an immortal external, and worse, he had been the one who had killed Bobby's father. Gideon had been searching for the next Eternal, and he believed Sunspot could fill that role, and because of this, he had Bobby subjected to multitudes of experiments that boosted his solar absorption by a whopping 3,000%. I mean, this isn't a minor number or a small power adjustment. For context, this was kind of like taking a candle and turning it into a small power plant. Thankfully for Sunspot, around this time, Cable had turned the New Mutants into X-Force, and eventually, X-Force freed Sunspot. But all those artificial experiments and enhancements had changed Sunspot, and he subsequently discovered that he could fire energy blasts from his hands. But that wasn't all. Soon after, during a fight with the Mutant Liberation Front, Sunspot channeled solar energy around his body and gained the ability to fly. But unfortunately, he flew straight into one of Locus's portal beams and was sent right into the time stream. The later relationship between Bobby and Rainfire was more complicated than it first appeared, because Rainfire was eventually revealed to be a separate protoplasmic mutant entity connected with Project 19, which had copied Sunspot's appearance and powers. Rainfire formed a telepathic link with Bobby that reduced Sunspot into something close to his puppet. Cable later used his Ascani disciplines to help Bobby expunge Rainfire's control and managed to break the link between the two. Bobby returned to normal and gained better control over his powers, but by this point, he had become so powerful that he sometimes struggled to leave his blacked-out, fiery-headed state, although the Ascani methods helped him power down more effectively. Selene Gallio, the Black Queen. Selene Gallio, the Black Queen, is one of the craziest villains we've ever come across, and personally, I have no idea why she hasn't appeared in any of the live-action movies yet, because she totally deserves to be out there. The way she gained her godlike form itself calls for a horror movie. During the ancient Roman Empire, Selene wanted to sacrifice a vast portion of the population of the city of Rome, and in order to do this, she hired a senator named Eliphas, but in an act of compassion, he betrayed her. So Selene took his life force and turned him into a vampire-like creature, and even after thousands of years, Eliphas still couldn't move on from what he had suffered. He later took the name Eli Bard and searched the world for Selene, despite the curse she had placed on him. He finally found her in Nova Roma, but he was too afraid to approach her directly, so instead, he decided to finish her old plan by offering her thousands of purifiers as a sacrifice. But then, Eli saw what technarchy could do with the dead, and that changed things for him. He used this power to raise an Apache tribe he had killed many decades earlier, and Caliban was among those he later brought back. He presented this to Selene as a gift because Caliban could help find mutants across the world for her army and for her sacrifice. Selene accepted, of course, because if someone was offering her a chance to attain godhood, she was going to accept no matter what. To collect the dead mutants and claim their souls, Selene formed an inner circle made of mutants with deadly powers. Wither, Senyaka, Blink, Mortis, and Eli Bard all became a part of it. They traveled across the globe and raised dead friends and enemies of the X-Men before they finally reached Genosha. Now, this was after some 16 million mutants had died on Genosha after Cassandra Nova sent the Wild Sentinels, so this was the source of ultimate power for Selene. She ordered Eli to raise the dead mutants of Genosha. Because of M-Day, many of the resurrected mutants no longer possessed active powers, but still, the enormous number of resurrected mutant souls was enough for Selene's ritual. With those souls ready, she sent her inner circle to get the mystical knife needed to complete the rite. The inner circle attacked Utopia, killed Onyx and Diamond Lil, and then returned with the knife and Warpath as their captive. X-Force reached Genosha to stop the ritual, but they arrived too late, and Selene absorbed the souls of the resurrected mutants and rose to godhood. And this, my friends, wasn't a secondary mutation at all, but a magical ascension powered by mass sacrifice and stolen mutant souls. However, X-Force struck back, and Senyaka and Wither died, while Eli had already been killed by Selene earlier. Selene stood alone against X-Force until Warpath stabbed her in the heart with the same knife used for the ritual. She exploded, and it seemed as though she was gone for good, but that wasn't the case. You see, her essence somehow survived, and she later returned through further mystical events. Her story continues after this, but her monstrous and magical second form was what we wanted to talk about for this video. Proteus, Kevin McTaggart. Although Proteus and his powers and abilities may sound godlike, they're little more than a curse. Kevin McTaggart was the son of Moira McTaggart, the mutant expert, and Joe McTaggart, the politician. Like his mother, as later continuity would reveal, Kevin was a mutant, but his gift was reality warping, which meant he could bend the world around him in exceptional ways. Later Krakoan-era material revealed that Moira and Charles Xavier had discussed the need for mutants with specific powers, including a reality warper who could help make resurrection possible. However, Kevin's original history established that he was conceived after Moira was assaulted by her abusive husband, Joseph McTaggart, so it would be inaccurate to say that Moira and Xavier deliberately created Kevin as an experiment. Anyways, things didn't go quite as planned, and Kevin's powers and abilities pretty much burned through his body, which meant that he needed fresh host bodies in order to survive. His only known weaknesses were metal and that constant need for new vessels. Beyond that, he could change reality on a whim. Because his powers were so unstable, Moira locked him inside a maximum security cell at her mutant research facility on Muir Island, and I mean, come on, that's gotta hurt. When even your own mom puts you in a cell, it's safe to say you're having a pretty bad childhood. Kevin seemingly escaped after a battle involving the X-Men damaged the facility's security. His cell was heavily damaged, but there still remained a part of him in energy form, which only meant that he needed a new host. So, when a man came to destroy Moira's lab, Kevin possessed him and left Muir Island while still possessing this person. He later tried to take over Phoenix and Polaris, but both attempts failed, and after that, he escaped in one of Multiple Man's duplicate bodies and began his search for his estranged father, Joe. The X-Men tried to stop him, but Kevin still managed to find Joe and possessed his body as well. And yeah, up until this point, he had already discarded a number of hosts. During the fight, Joe's body also burned out, and Kevin, now called Proteus, became vulnerable in energy form. Colossus used his metal body against him, and that was enough to disperse the boy's energy. Proteus's energy scattered all across Scotland, and everyone believed he had died, but of course, that was not the case. Later, Erica Benson, also known as Harness, was hired by AIM to use her son, Gilbert Benson, whom she called Piecemeal, to gather Proteus's scattered energy. Gilbert could absorb what remained of Proteus, and his mother wanted it all. X-Force, the New Warriors, Moira, and several Muir Island mutants tried to stop the plan, but they failed. Gilbert's body exploded, and from that came a fused entity that was both Gilbert Benson and Kevin McTaggart. This new Proteus reshaped Edinburgh, Scotland, according to his own will, but when X-Factor came there, they didn't immediately start hunting Proteus. Instead, they were left pondering whether they should kill Proteus or try to help him. In the end, Proteus understood that reality itself was not compatible with him, and he ended his own life. But since his body was a lattice of energy, he didn't die permanently and became one of the mutants who retained their powers even after M-Day. He had a pretty rough go, but technically, Proteus's reality warping, energy consumption, and possession powers were part of his original mutation and not a secondary mutation, although they did lead to him taking on a lot of new bodies. Shadow King. Amal Farouk. Amal Farouk, better known as the Shadow King, is one of the scariest villains that Charles Xavier has ever faced, but this section isn't about a secondary mutation. Instead, Amal Farouk and the entity known as the Shadow King became catalysts behind Charles forming his school and finding his life's mission of mutant-human coexistence. After his breakup with Moira McTaggart and a period of traveling, as recounted in Uncanny X-Men issue 117, Charles found himself in Cairo. He was young, he had money, and he had no real desire to return to the United States or to his work on genetic mutation. He wanted some distance from his old life, and Cairo would provide that. One day, while he passed through the main bazaar, he let his psychic guard down for a moment and felt light fingers near his wallet and heard a telepathic laugh in his mind. When he turned, he saw a white-haired young pickpocket vanish into the crowd. Charles pursued her, but the girl knew the area better than he, and her thoughts were hard to track, even for Charles. Eventually, on an empty side street, he stopped her with a gentle force bolt and took back his wallet. Only years later would he realize that child was Aurora, the future Storm, but when Charles tried to probe her mind, a psychic blast struck him hard and almost knocked him out, after which Aurora escaped and Charles realized someone else had sensed him. He soon figured that the psionic force had come from a nearby establishment, so he entered that place, and this time his guard was up. The place seemed quiet, yet Charles felt tension and fear in the room. He checked the minds around him, but none had real psychic power, and then Amal Farouk entered through beaded curtains, dressed in a white suit, sunglasses, and a red fez, with two young women at his side. The moment their eyes met, the fight, the psychic kind, I might add, had already begun. Farouk spoke mind to mind and told Charles that he ruled the Thieves' Quarter. He offered him power beyond anything Charles could imagine, but Charles asked what that power might cost the victims. Farouk compared himself to a lion and said he took what was his by right. Charles, of course, rejected both the offer and the idea. They were both telepaths, yes, but Charles believed such power came with responsibility, which was very Uncle Ben, to be honest. Then, their real battle moved to the astral plane, but the thing is, Charles had never fought another telepath before, while Farouk seemed far more experienced in such matters. He chose the battlefield, formed psychic armor, and attacked before Charles could fully prepare himself. Farouk overwhelmed Charles with his greater experience on the astral plane and attacked him through a succession of symbolic psychic forms. Charles soon understood he would lose if he fought by Farouk's rules, so he stopped reacting to every monstrous form Farouk took and turned inward instead. He cleared his mind, gathered his power, and struck Farouk's brain with one focused psychic beam, and the fight ended in a burst of light. Back in the room, Farouk fell across the table, and Charles rose and left without a word. Later, Charles would tell Lilandra that he had touched Farouk's mind as he died, and it felt like a guided tour through hell. Farouk became the first evil mutant mind Charles had ever met, and that encounter gave him his life's mission, which was to protect humanity from people like him and help mutants and humans live in harmony. After Cairo, Charles continued to travel, including through Israel and Tibet, where Lucifer eventually cost him the use of his legs. Eventually, he returned home, formed the X-Men, and found a family he loved deeply. Later stories complicate the relationship between Amal Farouk and the Shadow King by identifying the Shadow King as a separate ancient psychic entity that had corrupted or possessed Farouk. So, this was supernatural possession, not technically a secondary mutation. Holocaust Nemesis. As a special mention, we really just wanted to mention this guy. Although it's not really his secondary mutation, his body would become something of a bionuclear energy reactor, which we got to see full well in the comic issues X-Men Alpha #1 from 1995 and Astonishing X-Men Volume 1, Issue #1. Set in the Age of Apocalypse alternate timeline, after a fight with Magneto leaves Nemesis stripped of most of his physical flesh, his existing energy absorption powers allow him to survive as concentrated bioenergy. Dark Beast then places that unstable energy inside a crystalline containment suit, completing his transformation into Holocaust. So this one wasn't technically a secondary mutation either, but a combination of his original mutant abilities, catastrophic injury, and technological containment. And after all that, we got to admit, the guy looked appropriately terrifying. Well, that's all we got for you this time, guys, but if you liked this video, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. That's the best way to see more of our content, and those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these awesome videos in the future. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one. Excelsior, baby!